My name is Starre Vartan. I am a science journalist. I've been focusing on women's health recently, and I am currently based south of Sydney, about an hour and 15-20 minutes in a little beach town that's as heavenly as that sounds. Although I did grow up in mostly in New York, I am a dual citizen with the US and Australia here. So I am very happy to be here for a while.
So it's like you have written an incredible book. It's come out recently. It's called The Stronger Sex: What Science Tells Us About the Power of the Female Body. And you very kindly sent me a copy of the book in advance, which I've read and absolutely loved. I've written a book review. It's on the website, so people can go and check it out. But where I want to start is with your book. It's the dedication, which is for my grandmother, Doris May Ross, the strongest woman I have ever known. I'd love for you to share more about your grandmother, your relationship with her, and why she was the strongest woman that you've ever known.
So I spent my earliest years here in Australia with my parents, and then through a long series of events, many of which are pretty gnarly, my mother was not able to take care of me. She got really into drugs and partying, and my parents actually switched countries. And so my mother is the Australian, and my dad's the New Yorker, and they met in Montreal, Canada. He stayed in Australia. My mother came to London actually first for a while. I was there with her, staying with friends for a few months, and then to New York City, where she got really involved in the scene. And so I was put on a train at 4 years old and sent up to my grandmother's, who had been a big New York City born and raised woman and had then built her own house about an hour and a half north of Manhattan in the Hudson Valley when she was in her 50s. And so I got to grow up in this wonderful house that my grandmother had like basically created herself in terms of how she designed it. So it was like a very female, woman oriented home because she had made it for herself as like an older woman. And so I grew up with her. She really put me to work from a pretty young age after sort of going through a lot of the trauma and the difficulties that a young kid sort of having those experiences came to her with. After that, she was sort of an old school parent, being a grandparent. She was 60 when I was born, so by the time I came to her, she was almost 65, which now that I'm an older person in my 40s, I think, oh my goodness, I can't imagine taking on a toddler who had no self-control at the age of 65, but that is what she did. And so after the initial sort of everyone getting used to each other period and me having a real schedule, she put me to work doing a lot of very physical labor on our property. And so that included age appropriate stuff, but always a little challenging. So by that I mean one of my chores was stacking wood. And so we would get the wood delivered in cords, and I would then take the loose wood and then help stack it. At first I would hand it to her. I would like walk over to the wood and hand it to her, and she would organize it, but she would teach me how to organize it. So it was very neat. And after a couple years of that, by the time I was like 6 or 7, I was able to stack the wood myself. So it was a learning process, but she always involved me in it. And that included working in the garden and planting things, but also doing like, carrying wood and soil, water, all kinds of things. And so, as you're growing as a child and learning how to do all of these activities, as well as, the sports I was doing in school and fun stuff like ballet and dance, I was also learning my own strength at a very young age. And from a grandparent who was also a very physically strong person herself, in her 60s, which was maybe a little unusual for her generation. She was born in 1918. So she was really not of the generation where really people went to the gym or worked out. But she, was very muscular and quite strong because of all the work that she did on the property. So I had just this tremendous example of what a woman was capable of. And so it was just she and I in the, woods at the on this dead end road in this town that was kind of a commuting town for people who worked in New York City. And then there was my jobs too, where I learned my own body and my own strength. And then I had this experience when I went to school where I really heard a different message about what women's bodies could do or girls' bodies could do. And I would be told to ask a boy for help carrying something like, a couple of chairs from one room to another when, we were doing things in our classroom. I remember being so, like, confused because I was doing so much tougher work at home, lugging stuff around for my grandma, and, here I was at school being basically told that, like, I probably couldn't do these things, and that was very strange and confusing to me, but you learn as you're a child that, like, "Oh, okay, there's some things that are acceptable in society and culture and some things that are different in your home," and that was one of them, and I sort of grew up learning to hide the fact that I knew I was strong and able to do these things. And I'll just add here that I'm not a small person, but I'm not a large person. I'm fairly straight in the middle of size and was as a kid too. So I wasn't, some extremely different looking child or anything like that. But, I just was doing this work from a very young age. And so I was used to it and used to testing my own abilities. And I did a lot of that running around in the woods as well. My grandmother was the opposite of a helicopter parent. So she would actually put a whistle around my neck and send me off into the woods. I wanted to go have adventures. I would have my little backpack and I would usually put a book in there and I would run around in the woods. And my grandmother said if anything were to happen, if I were to fall and hurt myself, I should blow on the whistle and she would come look for me. So that's a little different than I feel like is maybe available to a lot of kids today, but it taught me independence, and it again was a place where I would, run through the woods and be jumping over things, and I was always testing my limits, and, sometimes I would hurt myself a little bit, come back with banged knees and things, but, nothing really terrible ever happened, except one time I fell off my bike and really, hurt my knee. But other than that, I was actually quite capable because I think I was able to test those limits, and so I never got to the point where I did anything to truly endanger myself because I really knew what I was capable of even when I was, 6, 7 years old. So that's kind of the long version of my childhood, but it was really fun and, very joyous as well, and I just remember having a really good time with my grandma who just loved to teach me all the things, and some of those things I kept, the gardening and landscaping, which I still enjoy doing, and some of those things, not so much. She was an amazing cook, and I'm not.
There's other things that your body has remembered from those years that you spent with your grandma, lifting the wood and being raised by like a strong, independent woman, and realizing that you had this inner strength and also muscles for it. And I was really interested reading in your book about, especially around bone density for women, and talking about like the puberty age of how important that is for young girls and women, but we actually end up depriving our young girls and growing up from this opportunity to get strong and to build muscles. And so it's almost like they're the weaker sex. And I'd love for you just to share more around strength, muscles, and the importance of it, not only for girls but for women, even later on in life as well.
Yeah, so that is, like, what brought me to write this book was this contradiction that I'd kind of felt growing up. And then when I started researching it as a science journalist and over time sort of collecting information, I realized that so much of what we know about our own bodies and strength in the female form really is cultural. So by that I mean what you were just asking about, which is, we start as children being told that there are things we can and cannot do or should and shouldn't do. That's a big one. And it really affects our bodies for our whole lives. So the fact that I was lifting and hauling stuff around, wheelbarrows full of earth, and, when we were doing stuff in the garden, and then also my grandmother loved to build stone walls, so literally like hauling rocks around. All of that in a growing body actually builds the type of muscle that will stay with you for life. Now, what that means is that basically your body is training for what you're going to do when you're an adult. And if you think about the evolution of human beings, that makes sense, right? So if you were a coastal tribe and your tribe was dependent on fishing and swimming and doing certain types of physical activities, the children would do those things as they learn, the teenagers would do those things, and then that's what your body would be set up for to excel at as an adult. So it makes sense that our bodies are flexible in this way. The downside of that is that, of course, you can always build muscle and especially and importantly bone at any time of your life. And, that's really important and wonderful. Our bodies are flexible in that way. But that really deep fundamental strength that will eventually make, our best rugby players or football players or swimmers or anything starts in childhood and especially through puberty. One of the researchers I talked to here in Australia pointed out to me that we don't, her name is Sophia Nymphius. She's at Edith Cowan University, and she pointed out that puberty in girls starts a little bit earlier than boys. And all athletics training for boys is actually started right before they go into puberty or just as they start. For girls, it starts as they're already halfway through or maybe even close to finished with their prime puberty body changes. And training through your entire puberty really gives boys a huge advantage. And because girls are starting later in that training, they're creating a disadvantage. And I thought this was fascinating because I never knew that. And they actually have some really great science showing that, the activity and the type of work that you do, physical work, so whether that's athletics or other types of work, actually forms your muscles over time in this really special way. And that's what you see in athletics. You see these amazing female sports figures so oftentimes, and there's a whole study about this too, and really fascinating statistics of how many women who are really great rugby players or they're playing, in these national and Olympic level teams grew up with older siblings who were playing those sports. So they had that not just mental knowledge of how the game works, but they have that physical knowledge. They were training their little bodies all the way through puberty. That's how you get to some of this disparity between male and female athletes because there's this difference from childhood. And then besides that, which is more specific, you have this tremendous cultural difference. You have girls dropping out. I just wrote a long piece for CNN about this, about girls dropping out of sports at such like twice the rate that boys do at all age levels, and especially around puberty because athletic uniforms aren't designed for them. They feel uncomfortable with people looking at their bodies and wearing skimpy outfits. They are not taught how to deal with their periods when they're playing sports. And the research also backs this up, which is that, women's sports are also less well funded and women's athletics is less researched. And one of the big statistics is even for, amateur athletics, the sports science research that just looks at female bodies is only 6%, like six, like the number 6% of all of exercise science studies that exist. So we have a huge knowledge gap on top of all this cultural difference, on top of girls being in a disadvantage for all of these reasons. So you put all of these things together and all of a sudden you start to see that some of this weaker sex or, female bodies are less strong is not anything physical or biological. It's really down to these other things, expectations and understandings of our bodies. And so, one thing I did acknowledge in the book is that male bodies do have some very specific and, for the most part, not huge advantages over female bodies. Usually there's a measured difference of about 10% in things like marathon running and other sports when they're on the shorter side. So, male bodies have this advantage in explosive strength, Male bodies tend to preferentially use carbohydrates, which gives them a real boost for their energy, whereas female bodies tend to use fat a little bit more, which gives you a longer, slower burn. And so, there are differences. There are some biological differences for sure, but are they as big as we've made them and as important as we've made them, considering all the types of differences between human bodies? Probably not, but also we need to do the research to find out, and we need to provide equal opportunity for girls and women to find out. We can't even begin to answer those questions yet. We can only sort of make good guesses.
Yeah, it's just the more you look into it and you're just like, "Oh my god, 6% of the research is done on women," and it's just like, "Oh my god, they're like 52% of the population," and this all of this knowledge is ignored or missed because women are too expensive, it's too complicated to study, and it's like, no, 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 things need to change, which is why your book is so important to keep driving that message home. And I was really interested. We have a lot of runners who listen to the podcast, and especially around the endurance space, how it averages out sort of the longer the distances that women run. And we do see more and more cases of women winning races sort of outright, especially, the 200 plus multi-day endurance races. But I'd love to learn more about that, the relationship between that fat burning and those endurance that women just seem to be so good at.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating, and there's a lot of ongoing research into this. There is And it's important to always remember there's differences among all human beings, right? So, just as we all know some guys who have a lot of upper body strength, there are women that do too, and it tends to be that men have more, but there's overlap. We all know women who are taller than some men, and we all know people who do maybe things that are not as expected of their gender, right? And so the in human beings there's a lot of overlap. So, that being said, it's just important to keep that in mind because there are genetic differences that are down to, background and ethnic differences, and also just individual differences, even within, any given ethnicity that, one male body could maybe burn fat more so and carbs less. And there might be female bodies that burn more carbs and a little bit less fat. And those people might impact the type of sports that those people are attracted to. So when you're talking about something like endurance running, you'll probably find a lot of people whose bodies naturally, or because they've trained over a long time, because training impacts this as well, are better at burning fat. But what we do know is that if you take 200 women and 200 men in general, you can say, okay, the women are going to be better at burning fat and have this longer endurance capacity. And one of the most interesting studies on this was done in, I think it was the mid to late 90s. I think it was 96, 97. Sandra Hunter at the university, now she's at the University of Michigan. She brought a bunch of people into her lab, and she was like a young postdoc. She was just starting her career, and she just wanted to get some basic measurements, do kind of a simple study, and she was studying muscles. And so she brought, a various different college students into her lab, and she had a machine where they would sit in a seat and they would push up on a weight. So they were, resting their elbow from a seated position and then pushing upwards and then holding it as long as they could and then coming down. And how she did it was she had each of them lift 50% of what they would be able to their max lift. So if you could lift 100 pounds with one arm, the 50% of that would be 50 pounds and so on. So she calibrated each weight to each person, basically. So she had the most fascinating results that surprised her and surprised her older colleagues who were more experienced, because she found that most of the women were able to, even though they were lifting 50% of their own capacity, were able to hold it for very long periods of time, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Sandra Hunter herself was able to hold the position for a good, half hour. And then, the male people that she had coming in, so she had big burly guys and she had, not so athletic guy, just the variety of people you'd find on a college campus. And none of them would last longer than 5 or 10 minutes. And it was almost like the more muscular they were, the greater their muscular capacity, the less time they could hold it to an extent. And there's a little bit more detail in that. But it was this really sort of groundbreaking research that led to her focus for the rest of her career on looking at sex differences in muscles and how that works. And again, I mean, this is a perfect example of the research that was never done. Nobody actually knew this was a thing until she looked into it and then, sort of made her career around it. And then there's been lots of science since then that has backed up her results. So this is very well documented science. And, her whole thing was then she started looking into it. She's one of the early researchers who determined that it is likely because of this greater capacity for burning fat. And, you see that female bodies tend to carry more fat naturally, even at the same level of athleticism. A woman carrying less than, 15% body fat, that's really getting into unhealthy territory where you lose your period and you get into health issues. Whereas a man at 15%, that can be perfectly healthy. I mean, that's low for anybody, but it's very low for women in a different way. And so, women's bodies tend to carry this extra fat. We tend to carry that extra fat on our hips, our butt. That subcutaneous fat doesn't affect your metabolic health in the same way as that abdominal fat does, that men preferentially store their fat. So when they gain weight, they tend to gain that belly fat. And so this goes back to our evolutionary history. This is a reason why female bodies were able to store fat to grow babies, to complete tasks and keep up with doing all of the things you needed to do as a person living 15 or 20,000 years ago while pregnant, while breastfeeding, while going through all of these life stages. You have this backup energy supply and a special kind of fat that's really good for growing babies. And you also then have this endurance capacity built into your body because you have to be able to do this incredibly complex metabolic work of pregnancy and breastfeeding as well, which is also a highly energetic process. And at the same time, be doing all the things that you would normally do, hunting and fishing and foraging and lugging firewood and water and whatever. So it makes sense that there is this built-in ability for the female bodies to do this. And it really is, to me, a tremendous strength. I mean, the fact that the female body is able to do all of this work and even outside of pregnancy and breastfeeding has this capacity to keep going and use this long burning fat to do it is a strength. I mean, how is that not a type of physical strength? And I just, to me, it seems so obvious. It's almost not debatable, but of course, people have wanted to debate that.
It's really fascinating. I think this is one of the things that I really love about your book. It's this combination of the science and the facts and the information, but intertwined with these wonderful stories. Because you did get to travel all over the world with your book, in doing this research. And one of the places that you visited was Japan when you were researching longevity and why do women live longer than men. I'd love you to share more about your experiences or why you ended up going to visit Japan and what you've learned about women and longevity.
Yeah, so that was definitely one of my primary focuses when I started this book because, I think we all heard both during and sort of after, especially in this world of science and science journalism, I heard about this a lot. How many more men died of COVID than women? And, this sort of was something we saw early in the pandemic and in the midst of the pandemic. And, there was lots of studies done on all of the demographic information about this as it was going on and afterwards. And that's something that is actually echoed in many diseases, almost all diseases, in fact. women's bodies have just this profound immune strength advantage. And when I got into it, it turns out that is both linked to genetics, XX chromosome, and the ability for the different genes to turn on and off. And since we have two copies of everything, since there's one on the X and one on the other X, whereas men have the X and the Y, it just gives us a really tremendous advantage there. And then also, estrogen is a really great booster for immunity. And so, between those two things, women have a longevity advantage just based on disease, recovery from disease, and the ability not to die from things that kill men. But there's so many other reasons that women live longer as well, including cultural ones. Because men have both kept women out of certain types of jobs and have also I think really decided that those jobs were male only, and then there's women that agree with that, or maybe not, but that's where the situation is. There's cultural reasons for some of that female longevity. Women don't tend to go to war or to do the most dangerous jobs. I would argue there's plenty of women that want to do those jobs, and they're not allowed to do them. But the case is that there is a disparity there between them in the more dangerous jobs, physically dangerous, I should say. But, that also goes to chosen activities as well. So, like, men just take a lot more risks. They drink more, they smoke more, they do more drugs, they engage in much riskier activities, especially when they're younger, but all throughout the lifespan. And they die at higher rates from all of those things too. So there's these like very strong physical reasons that women live longer. And then there's also these cultural reasons. And some of the cultural reasons, they like back each other up. And so that's what I learned when I went to Okinawa in Japan, which is sort of it's like an island part of Japan. So it's a little bit more tropical, and it's very lovely, but has still a very strong Japanese culture. And I went there because the oldest women in the world live in Okinawa. The oldest people in the world, there's a few different places where people tend to live very long, but Okinawa is basically the top of where everyone lives a really long time. The women live particularly longer than the men. And so what I saw when I was there is some of that is these cultural things. I mean, the men tended to do the smoking, and they were doing the more actually sedentary jobs in their culture, like driving taxis and things like that. But the other part of it is that their culture really celebrates being older and all this stuff, and that goes for everyone. And so growing older is seen as a really important and beautiful thing. And there's an idea called ikigai, which is that everyone looks for and tries to fulfill this idea of like their ultimate life goal and what is most important to them. And so a lot of people's ikigai is actually spending time with their really good friends. And that is, for some people it's their profession, other people it's volunteering or doing something for animals or those kinds of things. But a lot of people it's like hanging out with the people that they've known for 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 years. And I met some of those going to this wonderful bar that, was being run by a woman in her mid 90s. And, her patrons were all basically her friends who were also in their 90s. And so I got to spend the evening with them, kind of trying to find out the secrets of longevity. And, certainly they were eating these healthy bar snacks, and they were drinking very diluted drinks out of very small glasses. It was very much the 50s, 60s idea of a cocktail. Like the martini glass was quite petite compared to what we normally see today. So yeah, they were definitely hanging out and drinking, but this wasn't a heavy drinking situation for sure. And they had all these very delicious snacks too. But it was really about the conversation. It was about singing songs together and really having a lot of laughs. That is something that I noticed. There was so much laughter the whole time I was there. I don't even speak Japanese, and I had a translator with me, but I was still laughing too, because when people are laughing around you, you kind of it's infectious, right? So that was like really fascinating to me. And the ladies there told me they thought that women lived a longer time because they did more types of they had more worlds to inhabit, and that like men kind of had their own place and were and even though the men benefit from all these wonderful cultural aspects, of life in Okinawa, the women had, the places where they would spend time with just each other. They had their time raising children together. They had their time cooking. They were oftentimes the ones who would do three or four or five things during the day while the men were out doing one job. And so they told me they thought that part of the reason for longevity was that the women got to do more things and have more different parts of themselves. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And they can only guess. And of course, scientists are studying them and studying their genetics and all kinds of, exactly what they're eating and all these things. But the jury is still out. We don't really know why the people there live exceptionally long, and there probably is a genetic component, but there's definitely other things going on there too. And it was really a joy to meet all of those people. It was really beautiful.
What are the changes that you're making in your life with regards to longevity and, aging well that you've learned from doing the research in this book?
I started weightlifting 3 years ago now, I think. Basically, right when I was beginning this book. So, yeah, about 3.5 years ago, I was talking to my aunt here in Australia, and she and her mother, my grandmother, and then my great grandmother all suffered from osteoporosis. And in fact, my great grandmother was called Little Nana because she shrank so much in her old age and lived quite a long time, but functionally had issues because of osteoporosis, which can, basically it breaks down the bones in your back, and so you can get, inches shorter than you would have been as a fully grown adult. And so this was a huge concern to my aunt. She was pretty freaked out about it in her like mid to late 60s, kind of getting this diagnosis. And so she found the work of a woman here called Belinda Beck. And Belinda, and again, this is another female scientist figuring information out about women's bodies because that's mostly who's doing this work. I just have to point out that the curiosity and interest in female bodies by male scientists has been really sadly low. Not that there hasn't been some, shout out to the guys who did do some of that research, but really just most of the work at this point is being done and has been for the last 30 years by female scientists. So Belinda Beck she wanted to figure out a way to grow bone, or could you answer the question, could you grow bone once you were sort of in this stage of having, more extreme bone loss? And so it's fairly well known that, if you grow muscle, you can grow bone. That can happen at any stage in life, which is such a hopeful thing. And so she went about creating a system to apply to older women who had osteoporosis and testing it very rigorously and carefully. And she found out that indeed, even osteoporotic female bodies can add bone by doing heavier weightlifting. Now, this was very, very well supervised. Of course, you don't want people breaking bones when they're trying to get healthier, but she proved this, and then she proved it again, and then she proved it later in men as well. But mostly her focus has been on women's bodies because, as your audience may know, we lose bone density as we age as women when you lose that estrogen in menopause. And you basically have your prime bone growing years through the age of about 35, depends a little bit on the individual. And then you lose bone as you age about 1% a year after age 45 or so. And that's true for both men and women, right? But women have an acceleration of bone loss when they go through menopause. So men can obviously get osteoporosis as well and do, but usually at much, much older ages. And also, what grows bone and makes bone strong to begin with is that muscle, and men tend to engage in muscle building activities. So these aren't, unfortunately, things like yoga and Pilates. These are, and hiking and walking, running a little bit, but really lifting heavy weights or something that's more high impact, like dancing or anything that involves impacting the bones, which we'd actually been telling women not to do these activities because of bone health for a long time. So we actually gave very bad advice to older women for the last 30 plus years, which is extra unfortunate. But women also just don't tend to do activities that grow muscles. So I made the change as soon as I saw, I mean, I read through all Belinda Beck's research and it was shocking and amazing. And, my aunt had already started this program. So she was working on her own strength. And I was like, well, geez, I'm not, I haven't gone through menopause yet. I still have the opportunity to grow my own bones and hopefully not follow in the footsteps of my female relatives on the side of my family. And so I started lifting heavy weights. And I noticed at what my aunt also reported to me and what Belinda Beck's subjects reported to her, which is, not only are you doing this thing that's great for your body, but it feels really good. It's tremendously empowering and fun to lift heavy weights. And, you start slowly so you get all your technique down and you don't hurt yourself. And that's really important. But once you get past that initial phase, I mean, I was just lifting 42 kilos over my head yesterday at the gym, which is 85, 86 pounds, I think, somewhere around there. And just, throwing it up there and jumping underneath. And it feels so empowering to do that kind of exercise. And it also is really good for your cardiovascular system and your circulation. It's kind of like high intensity type of workout outside of the bone building. And the science behind it is really fascinating. I'll just mention briefly. So, what happens is as you age, you get these little micro cracks in your bones. And once you get to the point where you have osteoporosis, they become significant and problematic. But we all, kind of get these. And when you do heavy weight bearing activity, the osteoblasts are activated in your bone marrow to go and find those cracks and those spaces because they become known by the body when you're lifting those heavy weights, because when you put the stress on them, it kind of shows the body where those cracks are, and then the body sends these osteoblasts in to fill those spaces in, and that basically is building bone. So you're building muscle and then you're building the bone that's underneath them. And so that's probably the biggest change that I made in my own life in terms of the research that came out of this book when I'm thinking about longevity and my own future. Because you might have heard about there's lifespan, how long you live, but there's also health span, how long you can live healthfully. And we all want to live a long time, of course, but we all want to be as functional and able as we can be in our older years as well. I mean, my grandmother, my Nana, she ended up spending the last year of her life in a hospital bed because she broke her hip and she was never able to start walking again. And that was because of osteoporosis. And so, you know, that's not how I want to spend my last year. And if I can honor my other grandmother's memory as well, it would be learning from what her mistakes, which, she didn't know and nobody knew that the advice she probably had gotten was bad, and doing something different so that I have a different experience of being in my 80s and 90s than she did. So that's probably the biggest change that I made. And I'm going to continue with it. It's just been a lot of fun. And I will say for runners and everybody else out there, it does make me a stronger runner. And I also do dance and a much stronger dancer. My quickness has improved because even though you're lifting weights using your arms and it seems like it's more of an upper body workout, actually it's a full body workout. I use a lot of my thigh and calf muscles, and I've noticed a great strength gains over the running that I had been doing previously since I started weightlifting that make me just faster and more nimble, which I was not expecting as a runner. I'm a trail runner, so I'll just speak to trail running. I'm not running on tracks, but yeah, I'm going to keep up with the weightlifting. It's fun. Recommended.
I end up like recommending like strength training to everybody, and sometimes it can be, especially white women, and sometimes it can be frustrating because it's just like there's so many women who just don't want to do it because of these outdated myths about, well, I don't want to get bulky, and it's like you're not going to get bulky. Oh my god, you want to get strong. It's for your bones, it's for your lifespan and for your health span, and so it's so great when the science is there and I can literally be like, read this book, please read this book, get weightlifting, get stronger, build your muscles, just, improve your quality of life. It's going to be make such a massive change. I actually got my mum into strength training in her 60s, and she's in her early 70s now. And we're at the gym, and if I go away on like big adventures or challenges, and when I come back, I've lost like quite a bit of muscle, and my mum can like outlift me, but which is just, and she loves it when I'm like having to take the weights off, to go to a lower weight. And she's like, "Oh, you're having to reduce it down." But there's women in my gym who I've been training with now for 10 years who are in their 60s, and my mum, who's, early 70s, and they are just so strong. And this is what inspires me, because it's like, that's what I want to be like when I am in my 60s, 70s, 80s, to be
Yes.
that strong and fit and healthy. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I hope other women listening will be like, right, come on, it's time to sort it out, get to the gym, start learning how to lift heavy weights. It's going to make such a massive difference.
Yeah, it really does.
So, Star, one of the things that you mentioned just before, especially when you were over in Japan with these incredible women sitting in the bar, just sort of laughing away, you talked about like ultimate life goal. And I suppose that's having that purpose. What's your ultimate life goal? What's your purpose? What are you working towards?
I think my goal at this point is for the next, 20 years to hopefully keep getting to write about these subjects. There's really a tremendous amount of work happening now. Unfortunately, not so much in the United States, but almost everywhere else. The science and researching women's bodies, and here in Australia, they have a mandate for 50% of research in sports science to go to looking at women's bodies and, women athletes. So, I mean, we're just going to have so much more information in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And there's also, I don't always love AI, but there's some really great uses of AI within science for data crunching, and that might help. And one of my projects is going to be over the next few years to try and figure out how to use AI in these very science specific ways so that we can bridge that gap between all of the research historically that's been done over the past 50, 70, foundational research all on male bodies, and how we can catch up with that research with female bodies. So that's like incredibly exciting. There's so much happening. There's so many more women who are actually involved in the research, who are doing the sports, young women who are at the age now, young athletes growing up who are the first generation ever. This blew my mind when I heard it the first time, to have seen female athletes on television on a regular basis as a normal thing. 20 somethings now are the first women who had that experience. All the women that came before them were kind of like figuring it out for themselves and out in, like with almost no I mean, they were just pioneers, and amazing that they did that work for us so that now the next generation can come. So these are now a generation that's going to go on to become the coaches and become the advisors and become the university presidents and all of the things, right? So that's a huge change, and I'm excited to hopefully keep talking about it and writing about it and write more books. I'm also working on a project right now looking back in time at sort of how we got to where we are now in terms of our physical bodies, because women's bodies do have all of this capacity and strength, and we did use our bodies in very different ways in prehistory. And so I'm looking at sort of the anthropological evidence, of which there is a lot of new science as well, about what women actually did, both their work and their lives, and understanding how we actually, evolved to be very strong humans. And that this sort of like little interlude of the last few hundred years of really keeping women constrained and small and weak and telling all these stories about female bodies, I think over my thesis is over the course of human history will be seen as sort of the aberration, because that's not where we came from and that's not where we're going. Because we're living in it now, we see it as like, oh, this is a natural thing to think of as male bodies so much stronger. But that is not the way, we evolved. And so that's my near-term plan, and my longer-term plan is to, keep traveling and minding my own health and keeping up with the research for my own selfish reasons for my own body, and hopefully being able to age as strongly as my grandma who raised me, Doris, and even outdo her if I can. That's a goal. We'll see if I can be 80 and building a stone wall.
And start, where are you most active on social media, and how can women connect with you and learn more about the work that you do?
Most active is probably Instagram, and most fun because I have all my work stuff there when I publish articles, because I write magazine articles all the time. I write for New Scientist a lot in the UK. I write for Nat Geo and Scientific American in the US. So my first and last name, my first name is spelled Starre, just to be a little different. It's the old English spelling, and Vartan, Vartan. I'm very easy to find because of my unusual name. And then I also will mention that I have a newsletter that I've just started called Palimpsest of Flesh. And it's all about how culture meets science and women's bodies. And I just started it. I am just finishing up my second newsletter this week. So if you're interested, that's all linked on my Instagram. And I have a website, and I'm doing a cool project on hormones with a friend of mine. We're doing a little vodcast on just how hormones actually work in the body, starting from a fetus all the way to old age, because I feel like most of us have such random information about hormones and how they affect our bodies, and they're in charge of so much and have such a tremendous impact on health and women's health and men's health and intersex people's health and everybody's health. And so we're really curious and interested to just like share some of the science about that in a fun way. And that's called Gender Juices. So that's our podcast that's coming up. We're going to record the first episode at the end of this month. So, but that'll all be linked on my Instagram.
And I said that that's the first time that I saw on your website the difference between like a podcast and like a video podcast. And I actually really like that wording, because I personally think they're like two separate things. So like having an audio only podcast and then having the video podcast, having a vodcast is actually awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your story on the Tough Girl podcast. And I'd love for you to share your final words of advice and wisdom for the stronger sex. And you can take this in any direction that you would like. Just, I don't know, maybe words that you wish you'd heard when you were younger or when you were growing up, to motivate and inspire other women and girls to live their best lives.
So I've been actually thinking about this a lot. I have a birthday in a week from today. And so I think, and I'm at that age where I'm thinking a lot about myself in my 20s and all of the mistakes I made, and the places where I'm like, wow, good job looking back. So I think it's listen to your body. I think our bodies have tremendous wisdom, and if anything, I wish I'd listened to my body more. I think that I listen, especially when you're younger, you hear all of this stuff coming at you, and I've always had a higher BMI because I'm very muscular and active, but when I was younger, I just purely thought like my weight made me unhealthy, and I didn't eat enough sometimes, and the whole time I kept thinking, but I feel healthy, and I have all these great, lab results, and but supposedly this being this weight is unhealthy. And so I think I could have avoided some of the harms I probably did to myself by under eating for periods of time and over exercising by listening to my body, because my body was telling me like, you feel good, like you're fine, like stop. This outside information wasn't great. And I think there's a little bit of a rise of that happening after we had a really nice run of body positivity. So for younger women, especially, I know those messages can be really strong. And so listening to your own body, what it needs, when it feels good. And that goes for when you're spending time around people as well. I'm a cisgender straight woman. So like that reaction, that physical reaction I would sometimes have with different men, I think it was wise of me to listen to my body, listen to my gut. So that goes with, for eating and for exercise and for like relationships, and listening to your body. It can tell you a lot and really important stuff when maybe your intellect and your psychology and all of your thoughts and stuff that's going on in your head is confusing, I think our bodies can give us good information.
Absolutely. I love that. Listen to your body. Starre, thank you so much for writing such an incredible book and doing all of this amazing research and condensing it and making it so readable and so enjoyable. I really do think it is going to change lives. And just best of luck with continuing to live your ultimate life purpose and keep weightlifting and building that strength and live that long lifespan, that long healthy lifespan. And just thank you so much for sharing so many great top tips and advice and knowledge about the stronger sex. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hey, tribe, how are you all doing? I cannot believe that we are coming to the end of February. I really hope you enjoyed the episode with Starre Vartan. What an absolute inspiration. Now, everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com, so please do go and check it out. Now, since the beginning of the year, I have been to incorporate more reading in my life, so I'm trying to read every day, a minimum of 10 pages. Some days I actually end up doing a lot more because I can be a little bit of a speed reader. The other thing that I'm doing to help hold me accountable is I am putting book reviews up on social media and on the website. So all of the books that I'm reading are all by women. They're sharing their stories about adventures and challenges, and Starre's book is up there. So it's called The Stronger Sex: What Science Tells Us About the Power of the Female Body. Go and read my review, go and read her book. It's absolutely fascinating what you can learn. Thank you so much for listening to the Tough Girl podcast. I really appreciate you. I would love for you to leave a review on iTunes, on Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. It really makes a big difference getting reviews in. It really does inspire other women to think, okay, come on then, let's give this Tough Girl podcast a crack. Like, I'm sure there must be some good content, which there is. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.